This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 236, Top-Down Configuration. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking with Chris Wells. He's joining us to discuss his strategy on two-way automatic configuration synchronization between production development environments. That sounds confusing and exciting. I can't wait to hear about it.
Well, it sounds way more complicated than it is.
What's that, Chris?
Sounds way more complicated than it is. It makes it sound real fancy.
Yeah, I guess we'll see about that. So before we get to Chris, let's catch up with John and Nick. What's up with you, John?
Well, this week, everybody should have gotten their Drupalcon acceptance emails, or unfortunately, if you didn't make it, your soft rejection email. So those are going out. Unfortunately, my session did not get accepted. I'm a little heartbroken about that, but I'm sure they accepted a bunch of other really good sessions. I've also been doing a little bit of playing around with the media system, new media module in Drupal 8. Well, relatively new, and then media library, and seeing how I can enhance those with taxonomy and entity reference fields. So that's been interesting. What's going on with you, Nick?
Had a pretty quiet weekend this week, actually. I got a Roomba a couple months back, and I spent some time trying to get that connected to my home automation system.
What is that?
And a Roomba is a vacuum. But one of the things, it's one of those roaming vacuums. One of the things that really frustrates me about a lot of these things is they require an app. And like, there's no reason for a connected vacuum to need an internet connection. But in order to connect it, I needed to enable Bluetooth, enable Wi-Fi, enable location services, create an account on iRobot.com, download an app, and then connect it. And there were actually a couple of other steps in between, but
you should have gotten an older version. The version before that one does not require any of that. Mine does not connect to the internet at all and works great.
Well, mine doesn't connect to the internet at all either. I just had to create the account and log into the app on my internet connected network and then switch my phone to my non-internet connected network. So it still did the authentication, but it's now on a network that doesn't have internet access. So mine does not, and it just uses an MQTT server. So there's absolutely no need for it to have a cloud requirement. But I wish I had mentioned that before, because it would have been much easier for me to buy an older version than to go through that process.
So how do those vacuums work? Like, I've been thinking about getting one of those for quite a while. Do they work well?
Oh. Speaking of vacuums, mine's going off right now. Give me 1 second. I'll go shut it off.
They work. So this is my second one. The first one was like a cheap Chinese version. This one was about twice as much. It works.
Still a Chinese version, probably, though.
Well, iRobot's an American company, China. But it probably is. But it works okay. It doesn't work great for picking up my dog's fur, but he sheds a fair amount. But it does better than the other version. It's not, it doesn't prevent you from having to sweep every few days still, but it prevents you from having to sweep every day, maybe.
A friend of mine has a large dog, and he got one of those. I don't remember what company it is or what model it is, but he quickly learned that the dog's hair was filling up the thing so fast it was getting clogged and was almost useless.
Yeah, so if you're a dog owner and you have one, they have a model now that has like a bin. So the base of it has it parks itself into the base, and then it takes out all of the stuff it collects and puts it in a bin. That model is probably a better choice, but you still have to do maintenance on it because dog hair and stuff gets into the rollers. We don't have
So
a
the
dog. We
time,
have
so the
hardwood
time you
floors.
spend, so the time you spend cleaning it is probably about the same amount of time you could have spent just vacuuming yourself.
No, I mean
Yeah.
the problem actually that bin actually wouldn't help, and the bin version is actually like $1,500. It's obscenely expensive. The problem is that it gets stuck between, like, it doesn't get stuck around the rollers, but there's like a small chute between the rollers and the catch basin on the actual vacuum, and that's where the fur like backs up. Like it doesn't have a good
So-
mechanism of like pushing it into the catch basin.
So
But-
in talking vacuums, we actually just got a Dyson like stick vacuum, and that thing is awesome. I remember
John just left us. See you, John.
Did you see that viral video where someone's recording a show and then a kid just kind of like walks into the room? That happened for a split second right before John went dark.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So he shut his video off.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
he went
JJ
dark
just
on
ran
us.
out of the room.
I've had 3 of these things, and I just vacuum with a Shark now, and
Okay.
I had a Dyson, and I threw that thing in the trash. That's garbage. So-
I've been getting a lot of ads for the new Shark vacuum online. I like to watch. There's a YouTube channel called AVE that I'll share. People probably know about it, but he reviews appliances. He is a fairly foul-mouthed Canadian guy, but he takes them apart and talks about the construction. He's like shredded Dysons, taken them apart, and he talks about, whether he generally talks about whether they're worth the money or not. He's fairly hilarious, but I mean, I just have a shop vac because then you don't have to worry about anything. But those are a little loud and kind of cumbersome to move around. So, maybe once this Roomba kicks the bucket, I'll grab one of those. I'll look at an actual vacuum that we can use on the first floor. But that's what I spent some of my weekend doing. How about you, Stephen? What's new with you?
So not too much. I had some great feedback online this week that I wanted to share. So as you guys know, and anyone who listens to this show regularly, I'm constantly talking about Linux and how Drupal developers should be using Linux and you should switch over. So in this past week, I got 3 messages online from different people saying, hey, by the way, I've recently switched. I'm super happy. It was a struggle at first, but it's working out great and I'm glad I'm here. So it was really great feedback to hear from me. Like I said to one person, I mean, like one down, another million people to go. So I'll check that guy off my big Santa list of people that I need to convert. So it was great to hear that feedback. So anyone else out there who has switched over to Linux, share the good news with us. I'd love to hear it. Also, I wanted to mention that last week we had a show on about audio and Drupal, and Dave joined us, and he has a new training program out that's live now. If you go to drupaldave.com, you can sign up for his 12-week free Drupal training. So go to check out drupaldave.com. It looks like it's going to be run on Twitch, and it looks like he's doing like live trainings on Saturdays for like 3 or 4 hours during 12 weeks. And then you'll have that video to go back to during the week and do the exercises and stuff. So go check that out. And that's it for me. And joining us, as you've already heard, is Chris Wells. Chris is the owner/developer of Redfin. I guess some people would call him the CTO. That's an agency based in Maine. He is a contributor to core and a variety of modules. His company, Redfin, is one of the primary reasons that New England Drupal Camp happens every year, as they are one of the supporters who have funded it for 6 years straight. So those are the folks that when we always send out that first email that says, hey, New England Drupal Camp is coming, I get an email very quickly from Chris or Patrick that says, we're in, where do I send the money? So it's always great we appreciate that support, Chris. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Chris has also appeared on a couple of Talking Drupal episodes, episode 101. We talked about designing a movie website. That was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
probably 4 years ago, I'm guessing. I didn't look at the date, but it's probably 3 or 4 years ago. And then he was on episode 184. We talked about React. So, Chris, thanks for joining us again. And we're bringing you on today for some of your DevOps expertise. So we're looking forward to that. And we're going to hold you off for just a couple of minutes as we just touch on two quick stories, or actually blog posts that we saw this week online that I want to bring attention to. The first one is there's a blog post that's called, the title is Drupal 8 Performance Tips and Tricks for 2020. The tips and tricks for 2020, it could be for 2019, 18, 17, or 16. It's just sort of link bait, I guess, to get you to click on the link. But it was a great summary of ways to, or things to look at when you're trying to focus on performance for your Drupal site. I just wanted to point that post out. It's a great summary. I don't know if anyone else got a chance to look at it.
I didn't, but I thought it was interesting that your first reading of the title was, tips and tricks for $2.20, and
Yeah,
I was
for
like, wow,
$2.20,
those are really cheap tips and tricks.
I always get drawn because I've got a news reader that I pull in these Drupal blog posts and stuff from. I'm always attracted to these things that give you tips and tricks and performance related articles. And I thought this one was one that summed up the things you should look at pretty well. It's from Tandem. So the link is in the show notes. Go take a look at it.
I think
Stephen, did you get something from the article? Because I'm always drawn into these articles as well. And the one thing is, like, I'm like, am I going to get anything out of it? Like, is there something here that I don't already know?
Well,
not that I know everything. I'm not saying that, but like, we've been doing it a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So yeah, and I'm drawn to them too. There's one thing that jumped out at me is the number one item on this article. Thinking back to it was get a better host. I think was tip number one. And I think that's really an interesting point, is that a lot of tips, and maybe that's what drew me to promote this today, is that a lot of articles don't talk about the hosting provider per se, but the very first tip here is, go to a hosting company that specializes in Drupal. And they mention Platform SH, Pantheon, and Acquia. And I think that's a good tip for someone who doesn't want to do the DevOps themselves. And beyond that, the 10 or 12 other tips that are there are also really good to at least get you thinking and looking in other directions. The second item we had today is just to bring your attention to another thing that I'm always drawn to is video series or blog series. And there's one out from our old friend, Jeff Geerling, who just launched one where he's converting his Drupal 7 website to Drupal 8, and he's putting out a video series that takes you through the process. I think maybe the first one or two videos is out when I last looked at this. So let me take a quick look now. It looks like there's just the first one. Episode 2 is TBD. Or no, it's already there. You just forgot to update the title. So the second one is there. It says TBD, but if you actually run it, it's episode 2 is there. So if you're someone looking to convert from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, which I expect there's many of you that are, this could be another good resource for seeing someone else do it and learn some things there from it.
And if you're our friend Jeff and you happen to be listening, you need to update your title, dude.
Yeah. Episode 2 is no longer TBD. Chris, how are you guys over at Redfin dealing with Drupal 7 to 8, or is you guys past that hump already?
We are, man, when we got done with 6, I feel like it was just yesterday. It was a little bit longer ago than that, but yeah, we're basically we've got 2 really large projects going on over at Redfin Solutions right now, and they're both Drupal 7 to 8 migrations, upgrades. And so we're really in the thick of it over here. And I'll say this, we know Migrate API really well now.
Yeah. So if you were to give someone a couple of tips on if you're about to attack a 7 to 8 migration, what would you recommend doing?
My number one principle is you're basically going to rebuild your site anyway. So do everything the way you want. You know, if you were like, oh man, you know, this thing that I hate, my Drupal 7 site where I'm always having to like pick this from a drop down, or I'm, you know, something, you kind of like build the shell out in your ideal world on Drupal 8, because you can take care of everything else in migrate. So that's my number one thing is, you know, do it the right way now, and then you can always figure it out. You know, the site that we're upgrading now from 7 to 8 that I'm heavily involved with is a really great site. It was really well built 9 years ago, you know, when it was, and it was way ahead of its time for when it was built. But now we have, you know, we don't need to use field collection anymore. We can use paragraphs, or we can use layout builder. So I've actually done a ton of migrating pages into layout builder layouts.
I mean, that's what I'm really curious about. I think we should do a show about that, because
Chris, what are you doing next Tuesday?
Nah, you know what? I am happy to come on Talking Drupal whenever you all want me.
Interesting, because I also have an issue with going from field collections to either paragraphs or something else. So we should definitely schedule that show.
All right, so let's move on to our primary topic today, which is, the title of the show is Top-Down Configuration, but what this really is about is Chris has built into his environment at Redfin Solutions a process of moving configuration, like most of us do, from the bottom up, going from dev stage to production. Chris has automated a process to move configuration of a site the other direction. So from production to stage and dev. So let's start off with, what problem, Chris, are you trying to solve by doing that?
Yeah. And so the biggest issue is we have a lot of, you know, a diverse array of clients, and some are very savvy and others not so much. So when you're worried about the people who are not so savvy, they don't touch their website, they just kind of update content and they're good, this is not really for them. But when you have clients who need to change some things in production that are configuration, well, how do you communicate that down? They're not the kind of people who you want to, you know, and they don't want to be pushing configuration changes through a Git repository. They just want to reorder their blocks and put this one on top of that one, or they want to, you know, rename their menu, or they want to add a header to a view. You know, we have some clients who get in and change views or change web forms. They should be able to capitalize on Drupal's capability to edit web forms or move blocks around. But the problem with that is that's configuration. Right now in Drupal 8, for example, block positioning and block weights are all part of the config management system. So if they make that change, then we need to incorporate that change into the repository in some way. You know, we need to treat someone who's only changing configuration as a developer, as a coder now, because that's ultimately, we want all the config to be managed in our Git repository. So that's really what it all stemmed from is, you know, a great thing, especially when we're building a new site, is we just turn on config read only, and we don't let anyone change any config, and we push it all up through Git and we import it. And that's wonderful. But once you're in production and you have these savvy clients that need to reorder blocks or change web forms or update a view even, or even a developer, you know, we might get a support ticket that's like, you know, our events archive view is going in the wrong order and we need to go in and change it from ascending to descending. We shouldn't need a local environment to go in, make that quick change for them in 5 minutes and, you know, push that all the way up through. We should be able to just make that change, but we've got to capture those changes into our config management. And so that's really what started it, is how do we do that? And I had heard from Aaron Manier from Isovera had given a talk where he talked about Isovera's config management flow and talked about all these modules and what they're using. And then he said at the end, man, the brass ring for this would be if someone could change configuration on production and that could just automatically open a merge request of what that config change is. And that's what we've done.
So where's your breast ring?
It's in it's in GitLab, like most of my stuff.
So that's really interesting to me, because typically, I try to avoid, even the savvy clients, I try to find ways to make it so that they don't have to change configuration. But I think the two areas that my clients, even though they're not really savvy, as they're not really technically savvy, they're not going to be doing code or even really doing views changes or things. The two areas that trip them up are web forms and translations. Because if you need to translate a configuration entity, then that has to be propagated back. And so for me, like this is something that even if they're just updating content, they might, if they're running some of that stuff through, depending on how the translations are set up, they may need to propagate that back as well. So it's fascinating to me to even consider having a production down pathway. It's not something that I really considered. I just, personally, the way I've handled it is, just block those configurations from being overwritten from local. And then when I need to, just periodically update them, as a monthly process or something.
Yeah.
So I guess the first question I have is, what is the solution? Like, what is the process doing? Is it a module that you install? Is it a script that you run? How does it look?
Yes and yes. So it's both of those things. So yeah, one thing to clear up is we're not really, if you think about the loop from sort of local dev to integration to staging to production, we're not necessarily syncing that loop that same way back down, but really we're closing the loop from production back into the source repo. So and just to clarify that, basically changes made in production end up as if a developer had kind of made those changes and is asking for a merge request or a pull request in other parlance.
Yeah, and locally you would see that there's an upstream change.
Exactly. So you would sync up or whatever. Yeah. Yep. So I had heard about a module by Jürgen Haas, and he's also the guy behind Drupal Remote Dashboard, which Redfin uses. So for whatever reason, we see that guy everywhere, and he's a super responsive maintainer. He's really great. And so he wrote this module called Config Auto Export. And that's sort of the linchpin of the whole thing. Is it's using Drupal 8's new event subscriber model to subscribe and be notified whenever configuration changes on the site. And when that happens, it can do two things. It can fire off a webhook and notify a website, hey, configuration has changed. And then what parameters go into that webhook call is completely customizable by you in the config auto export UI. And the other thing it does is it can automatically export the configuration to a folder of your choosing. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, we didn't end up using the second part of that, the export to a folder. I actually just export it to a throwaway temp folder, and we don't use that. But what we do use is the webhook. So we receive notifications, and that's where a bunch of custom code that we wrote picks up. So the way that it works is whenever configuration changes, it notifies this webhook, and what this webhook does is it takes the sort of the site URI in, or like a unique ID for the site, and writes that to a text file somewhere. And that text file just keeps getting appended to throughout the day. So, even if we have, 10 configuration changes on one site, that gets appended in there 10 times. So that's sort of what I call the dead drop, or the canary in the coal mine that's kind of notifying us that something needs to happen. Then what I do is off working hours, I think I run at about 9 p.m. or something, but kind of once a day, I go in and I check all the canaries that have been sent my way in the dead drop, right? And I look and I say, reduce that list down to sort of a unique list of like, okay, here are 4 sites where configuration changed today, and
So
what
you
should I
distinct
do
it.
with it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take sort of distinct that so I don't have to run this process multiple times.
Yeah.
So that's like part A. Config auto export notifies this listener, and all the listener does is take the site, what site changed, and appends it into a text file.
Interesting. So you have this running like as a global for a variety of websites.
Yeah,
Are
absolutely.
they all sites that are in your environment that you're hosting yourself? That's not somewhere else. So like, it's not like one's on Pantheon, one's on
It is.
Acquia.
Yeah, it is. We actually have the big one that we have it running for is our Drupal 8 Redfin multi-site, which is in our environment.
Yep.
But every new Drupal 8 site that we've been setting up, we have this running for them as well, because the webhook listener is public. So all you need to do is tell me, well, what site got updated. So whether that site's on Pantheon or Platform or anywhere else. The only thing that I haven't yet dealt with is we have some VPNs for some clients, and I would have to script turning on and off the VPN to do part B of this process. So I haven't done that yet, but it's going to happen at some point. So part B now is where this other script I wrote, and that's leaning on Robo heavily. So I don't know if any of you all have used Robo as a task runner, but if you think about Gulp or any of the JavaScript task runners, Robo is a PHP task runner. And you know that I'm big on Magellan's as a PHP task runner, but that's more geared towards deployments. Robo is it's kind of a more generic drush. It's just a PHP command line interface, sort of. So using Robo to run these tasks. In fact, I think either Drupal console or Drush or maybe both use Robo under the hood to do some of their command line task running. I think Greg Anderson is who's really behind Drush, and a big guy at Pantheon is kind of behind Robo as well. So Robo is a PHP task runner, and I use that. You write a Robo file, and then you put the tasks in the Robo file. So I have some tasks that will, check for a remote branch, or post an error message to our Mattermost channel, or make a new merge request. So this Robo file, it has a task that basically kicks off this nightly process. So it pulls up the dead drop file, sort of reduces it down to, okay, I've got these 4 sites that have had configuration that changed today. And then what it does is it actually will clone a local copy of that site from our GitLab repository. We are big we're deep in the trenches of GitLab here at Redfin. So we host our own GitLab Community Edition repo, and the Mattermost chat that's attached to it. So we use that instead of Slack internally. And so it pulls down, it looks at that, and then it clones the repo in question, and then it will do a drush cpull from the remote site into that clone that it has. And it actually has these clones, and it stores them as Git submodules. So it's really cool that if you need to init it, or you can keep the changes for that site in between pulls, nightly pulls, so that you don't have to like sort of re-clone it every night. And then it opens a merge request using GitLab's API, and Bitbucket or GitHub also use this, have APIs where you can open pull requests or open merge requests. So that's what we're doing. We're kind of creating a branch named, site name -config, and we have it all automated. So the config bot auto opens a merge request of the changes that have been made in production that day. And then it notifies us in our chat channel, hey, there's a new merge request open for such and such a site. And then we get a human involved to actually review it and make sure that the config change is not, oh, I deleted my site, or, something that it's something.
So there's a disconnect between the time that the change happens and the time that the pull request gets open. So it sounds like the change might happen 10 a.m. in the morning, but the pull request won't get open until 9 p.m., 10 p.m. at night.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, so if somebody makes a change in the morning and then 2 hours later there's a deployment, that change would then get reverted, right?
So the thing to know is that we are not automatic. So this is, some of the shortcomings of this is we're not automatically importing configuration when we deploy. So
Oh, really?
we have humans that go in and say, okay, I've deployed something and I want to pull this change in. So that lets clients go in and make all the changes they need. But it means for us as a
You're not going
developer,
to lose anything.
once we pull down master to start working on a new branch, we're not going to blow anything away the next time that configuration gets imported. So, and here's the sort of reality of it is, in our use case, that rarely ever happens. So we're able to go in and, by that night, we're sort of discovering, well, it's really the following morning. So it runs at night.
Yeah.
And then someone, comes into the office in the morning and checks out all the pending requests and says, oh, okay, I can see that our client, updated some headers on their views and this is all fine. So they'll just merge it right into master. That way, if a developer comes in later and needs to work on a branch, they're going to start that branch off the tip of master, which will have those changes in it.
So this is a little bit, and I'm curious, how often do these pull requests get opened? I mean, are these daily things? Are they weekly things? I know project to project will be different, but I'm just curious, how often it was happening that it drove you to develop this process.
So the big thing the big thing to remember is we're still using for a big heavy project, like we're building a new Drupal 8 site or whatever. We still have config read only on that 8 site. We're not letting clients do anything, and we're letting that heavy stuff happen with, don't change any config. You're not allowed. These are for sort of our ongoing clients who have live sites that are running. So I'd say we have 1 or 2 sites a day that get a merge request that gets automatically open for them. And, sometimes it's just changing the text in the header of a view. It's really something that kind of is more content wise, but because it's in a view, it's configuration. Or, we have a sort of an e-commerce client and they like to reorder their blocks because they're pushing, this featured product this week. And then, they're just kind of moving that down and changing that, which block it is, but they don't want to just update the content of the block. They'd like to have the 10 products and then just switch out which block it is, and that kind of thing. So what it really is for us is, getting burned by the example you gave is, well, could we trust config management? And then we went in and we imported config and we blew away weeks of changes that we didn't know a client had made on production. So this way, it means that whenever we start a new feature branch, again, this is a lot for our sort of ongoing clients where, maybe once a quarter, they have one little thing for us to fix. We have a client that we just built sort of a podcast page for. And we needed a couple of views, but they've changed some things over the last 3 months. And we want to make sure that we keep that stuff in check. And it also helps us know what clients are doing, which is kind of nice, right? That who are the savvy clients who are going in and changing stuff? And also, are they going in and doing something that, might be detrimental to their site or their SEO or something? And we're able to catch that and say, hey, I saw that you did this, but now you don't have an H1 on your page or something,
Okay.
You're giving your customers some freedom without basically hurting themselves, probably, where a lot of agencies will just say, no, you can't do that. You got to come to us. And then it turns into this backlog of time delay to get something very small and simple done that the customer can do, but they're not allowed to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big thing for us. And that's why we got into Drupal in the first place is, God, decades ago when we were first getting into Drupal, it was still the era of a lot of web developers who are building static sites. And if I change my fax number, I need to open a ticket with a web developer to update my website. And so our ethos has always been empower the client, empower the client, empower the client. And so this is something where, coming from Drupal 6 and 7, our client, we taught our clients how to manage blocks all the time, and they would go in and manage blocks. And so it was a bit of a shock to them when we had to say, oh, you can't do that, or you can't even, with config read only on, you can't reorder a menu because the name of the menu is at the top. And so it locks that whole form, right? To us, that was an immediate showstopper. And that was, we've got to figure out something for this, because
the things that bridge the gap, between content and configuration are still difficult. That's for sure. So it sounds like the two areas of cost for you then, I don't mean cost money wise, but time wise, are, you have to monitor those pull requests. And I would say 2 pull requests a day from outside the organization is fairly significant, especially if it's something that's not very often. It's not a site that's often updating. You have to kind of refresh your memory. But the bigger one is, it sounds like your deployment process is different than most people, because you have to manually run the configuration import, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Or not manually, but you have to run like a command or something. Like you manually have to remember to do that, right?
Yeah. So when we do a deployment, we're watching that deployment in our GitLab CI, and we're being notified when the pipeline's done, so that it says, okay, I've just deployed this. And we have a human that always babysits our deployments, just to make sure, if you're the one who merged it into master, then you're the babysitter, because we want to make sure that client site, that there's a successful deployment. What we're not doing yet is a lot of automated testing in the GitLab CI pipeline. So that's probably a lot of why I would move towards something that was a little more automated, and these shortcomings would become a little bit more apparent if we're doing that.
So I'm curious, does the merge kick off a deployment for you? Because if there's an automatic merge request from the configuration change, and then you merge that pull request, does that kick off a new deployment?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So once we review it and hit merge, then it's going to go ahead and start a deployment and ship it back. Now, bear in mind that what we're shipping back is just the code that matches the configuration that's already in
production. So you don't need to run the configuration import at that point, because
exactly, because it's actually making the config import screen go from, here are some things maybe that have changed, to everything's all good here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is
Chris, good. How much, are you running into, obviously, I guess you would change your process if you're running into a ton of issues, but have you run into issues with this where conflicts? You guys either hit conflicts, or you blow away something a client has done?
And really, no, not yet. And I'm not, I say that with a smirk, because I assume it's coming. And I think one of the biggest shortcomings of this is the fact that it's all sort of timed, and it's all based around the fact that, we're kind of assuming once a night is fine. And it may not be. So that's one thing that kind of, all right, we'll assume that these changes are fairly infrequent, and they'll kind of go and they'll do something. And we're still, that's something that hasn't burned us yet, but I could see possibly happening at some point.
I think there's two. You could obviously just kick off the job once they get shortened to the file, but then you'd be running it multiple times a day, possibly.
Yeah, for sure.
Or you could also, on your CI, just check the canary and see if the site that you're currently deploying has a value in that file.
Yeah, that's a really good
thought. To block development, deployment.
Clearly, you can tell Nick's very excited about the topic because you can't really get a word in edgewise.
I think that's great. I when I pitched this to NetCamp, I wondered, I hope people are interested in this. And then
I think it's a super interesting issue myself. I look at, our deployment pipeline and how we do deployments. And I think something like this could be super useful. So with that, I have a few more questions for you. You said, you were using config read only. You still use config read only on some projects. What we've typically done is we've used config read only with config ignore for certain configuration. That's kind of like production only config. We don't really need to care about this. why is your approach better or more efficient than possibly using config read only with config ignore?
Yeah, so I like that question, and I like the config ignore question came up as I looked at this, and I thought to myself, I'm way too lazy to want to go in and specify, individual pieces of configuration that I think would need to change. So that's option one. I was like, well, this way they can kind of, get access to the whole candy store, and we'll just know what candy they took or changed, no matter what it is, which I like that idea because, do I have to go in and say, oh, now I allow a client to edit this view because they go in and edit that view. And then, I'm still getting friction. I would still get friction from clients when they're like, I got to ask my developer every time that I want permission to edit the header of a view, right? And, this way I don't have to worry about sort of whitelisting certain configuration. I say it's all fair game. And, if a client breaks their site, they're going to call us with an emergency ticket. So I'm not real worried about it. I'm just worried about like sanity checking the kind of stuff that they do. The other thing is that I still want my production settings in the repository, so that's one thing I think about it is like, well, if we just config ignore certain things like which search API server or something is going to, be the one that's in production, I want to make sure that ends up in a repo somewhere. Now that's
because then restoring.
Because then you have a config split, like you could do that with config split. So it's kind of, there's a lot out there. And so, this
Are
is
you using this with config split?
Yes, we are, though most of our splits are for our local development. So it's less of an issue. We do have a couple of splits for some staging sites and a little bit in production. And one thing that I did want to mention is that the config auto export module is config split aware. So it will sort of write out to the right config split folders when it writes out the temporary, exports the config for you. So that's a really good thing. So it's already in that system. And the other thing that I would say to you, John, is, even if my workflow doesn't work for you, config auto export might still, even if it's nothing but a webhook that goes into your Slack channel that says production configuration changed for X and such a site, you can just, that's what the webhook does. And you look at that and say, all right, well, let me know what that is,
Yeah. So I think, that sounds awesome. And looking at that module and tying it into, we're using GitHub, different Git stuff, but whatever. Tying that into GitHub somehow could be super useful. Two more questions, one of which is towards the end of our agenda here, but one is, you had said that you do have clients that aren't using this solution. So what if you were somebody were interested in trying to implement this, what types of clients are a good fit and what types of clients are like not a good fit?
Yeah. And I would say that if you know your clients well enough that you know that they're the kind of people who are going to reach out to you anyway to say, how do I move this block above this block? They don't need it. I think that the clients who they're always like, hey, I did some reading on views and I was reading on Drupal.org about how to, well,
how easy it is.
Then the bells
I believe
should
you're
be going
talking about
on.
the clients that are know enough to be dangerous. Those are the clients that should be using this.
Exactly. But they're also the clients who could be powerful and also, may very well know what they're doing. So it's totally valid to, I think this solution is perfect for them because, like Stephen was saying earlier, you are offering them some freedom to take the control over their site that they want and that their job demands. Yeah. But you've got a little backstop in place where you can say, hey, I did see that you just changed this web form, but all your, keywords were stuffed into that header for SEO, or, you're not really supposed to be, you just accidentally changed your 403 page to your 404 page. Right. Yeah, I don't think you wanted to do that. Right.
So this next question, and we're coming to a close here, but this next question is is like a six-parter, so brace yourselves. Where can somebody get this, right? So you've talked about a couple of modules. You've also talked about custom scripts that you've developed. Is there an open source module somewhere that has all of this stuff packaged up nice and neatly? Is this a product that Redfin is going to be putting out later? Is there a blog post that could teach us how to do this? Where do we get the information, Chris? Where?
Well, you've got to listen to Talking Drupal.
Yeah, there's an episode on a podcast.
So far, that's it. There was supposed to be a NedCamp presentation that you could have gone back through and watched, but unfortunately, I was a little overzealous. Had a surgery back in November, and apparently, a week out of surgery is not when you should be presenting at a camp, despite the fact that you think you would be able to do that. So, you know, right now, this is very custom to what we do. So, you know, I have not abstracted some layer away where you can say, open a merge request and it's pluggable to GitHub or GitLab. You know, it's our GitLab CE, and, you know, we've got a lot of stuff hard coded in there, our API URL. So one intent, if there was interest, was, okay, well, I could abstract some of those things out. I could take my API keys out of the class as class constants and do something better with them and put them in .envs or something. So, you know, I think it is something that even though it's not shareable right now, I would love to share with folks. You know, if people are interested in what I've done, I would absolutely, you know, strip out my API keys and then show them the code. And it would definitely be something that I think you could adapt to your unique situation. But, you know, I'm just kind of that guy who's like, all right, well, I can show you how to do it and see what you want to do. I don't think it's ever anything we're going to productize, you know.
All right. So if you're interested, you reach out to Chris Wells and he'll come to your location and show you how to do it.
I'd say, yeah, that's probably not inaccurate. So I like to travel. So if someone wants to, you know, have me come out to the nice weather of, you know, Florida or California and show them some PHP and Robos scripts that I wrote, I'd be more than happy to do that. So you get me in the
Providence, Rhode Island. Providence, Rhode Island is lovely this time of year. Just saying.
It's probably nicer than up here. We had quite a bit of ice storms here in Portland that I think you didn't have even in Massachusetts, let alone Rhode Island.
No, I got the ice storm.
Ah,
yeah, nice. half inch of ice.
Yeah, all we got is rain. So with that, fair listeners, if you have questions or feedback, you can feel free to reach out to us at Talking Drupal on Twitter or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get show updates by signing up for our newsletter. There's some great content in there. You can sign up for that at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
I would also like to take a moment to thank our patrons. If you are a patron, the primary benefit right now is you get a full, raw, unedited version of the show, including pre and post show. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button.
Hey, Chris, thanks for joining us today. It was great to have you on again. If anyone is interested to reach out to you, learn more about this or anything else at Redfin, how would they go ahead and do that?
So redfinsolutions.com is our website. It's a Drupal back to Gatsby site that's a few months old now. Just had to hop on that bandwagon and see what that was all about, and that was fun. And you know, as always, anyone interested in calling Redfin, it's 9084 Drupal. So you can call that number, or really, if you're interested in me or my stuff or the topics that I talked about today, I'm on Twitter at SCEO. So I don't know, CO, I say. And, you know, all my Drupal people are there on Twitter. That's my like Drupal haven in the realm of social media. So that's a great way to reach out to me, if not the website. And while I'm here, I'd also like to plug, we're always on the lookout for front end, back end, or some DevOps, sysadmin types of people who want to work in beautiful Portland, Maine, despite the ice storms. You know, Portland's a great city, and we are an on-site business, and we love having, you know, the camaraderie of having people around. So not a remote job, but if you are interested, you know, check that out at redfinsolutions.com as well.
Great. How about you, Nick?
If I unmute, you can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And John.
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about Umfit, umthink.com. Stephen,
Awesome.
with a PH. Where can people
Yes,
find out about you?
I'm Stephen Cross. That's Stephen with a PH on Twitter. Best place to reach me. Thanks, guys, and talk to you soon.
Thanks for having
Absolutely.
me, guys.